the panel discussion on empowering women through skills for a resilient future. I request the moderator, Ms. Tina James, to please introduce the guests.
Good evening, everybody. It is a privilege to be here today and welcome you all to this panel hosted by WIIT, Skill Her, Empowering Women Through Skills for a Resilient Future. Kerala has long been recognized for high literacy rates, human development achievements, but when it comes to women's participation in the workforce, there is still a gap between the potential and what the actual reality is. Encouragingly, in recent times, we have seen a positive trend in the state where the workforce participation for women has risen from 32.3% in 2020-21 to 36.4% in 23-24, which surpasses the national average. This is progress worth noting, but it still speaks to untapped potential, with the state government pushing for a participation of up to 50% in the next 5 years. Today, our discussion focuses on skilling, which is the single most important lever which could make all the difference in enabling economic independence and creating pathways for resilience and equality for women. In this session, we'll explore 3 critical dimensions: how skilling can open doors to new and high-growth sectors, what systemic and societal barriers continue to hold women back, and what are policies, partnerships, and innovative models that can accelerate inclusive participation at scale. With us today, we have an exceptional panel representing industry and developmental organizations who will share insights on how Kerala can lead the way by turning women's skilling into a competitive advantage for the state. Joining us today, we've got Ms. Kanta Singh, Deputy County Representative, UN Women India, an amazing leader with over 20 years of experience in capacity building and advocacy for education, employment, and entrepreneurship for young women and girls. Ms. Lata Nair, Vice President and Head of Delivery, IBS Software. Lata is a visionary leader who drives large-scale impact while fostering a culture of growth, collaboration, and resilience within her team. We also have Ms. Radhika Vishwanathan, Vice President, Women Inclusive in Technology, and Director, HR of Ozontel. By profession, Radhika spearheads HR transformation across her organization. By passion, she champions inclusivity, creating returnship and upskilling programs that empower women to thrive in their careers. Joining us today is also Mr. Sai Advait Krishnamurthy, Assurance Technology Risk and Center Head, EY GDS, Pune. Sai is a strong ally of empowerment of women in the workplace and has spearheaded some of EY's flagship return to work initiatives. And Ms. Dipanvita Chakrabarti, Head of HR, RRD, Kerala and Sri Lanka. Dipanvita is committed to shaping progressive people practices that build both talent and culture. So with that, we'll move on to our session for today. And Kanta, I would like to start with you. Globally, UN Women has been at the forefront of women's empowerment. How do you see skilling as a lever that would not only help economic upliftment, but also advance gender equality and resilience in societies like Kerala?
Thank you, Tina. Good afternoon, everyone. In fact, good evening now. UN Women has offices in about 182 countries. In India, we have been there for almost 25 years, but UN Women was formally established in the country in 2010. So we are relatively young as far as the UN system is concerned. In terms of resources, Indian, like what you see around the world, how women face issues, exactly the same issues are faced by us in UN, because we are the smallest in terms of resources, we are smallest in terms of numbers, and also we are looking for attention all the time, that look at us, we are dealing with 50% of the population, we are dealing with a huge mandate, yet the resources are very limited. Only limited number of member states, because what UN gets is money and UN gets its resources from member states. Member states are very reluctant to fund gender equality. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we face. And because of which the mandate that we have, which is huge in terms of women's employment, women's skilling, women's livelihoods, but more importantly, looking at the normative work that member states have to do, then remains unfulfilled. Violence against women is one of the major structural barriers that women face at home, in public spaces, also at workplace. And now the latest one is the cyberspace. So UN Women looks at all these issues that women face around the world, but we, at the core of everything else that we do, we want every young woman and girl to get equal opportunities for being self-dependent, so that she doesn't have to be dependent on men or parents or anybody else in the world, because her condition may be very good in the family or in the society, but her position will only improve if she is earning her own money. And we keep that at the center of everything we do, whether we work at the policy level, we work on the ground, or we work with partners who support our work throughout the world. So we take gender equality issues exactly the same way that UN Women should. And I think all of us are also going to talk about those issues, but that's the core mandate UN Women has. I'll stop here because other people.
Thank you, Kanta. And towards women becoming more financially independent, I think when we talk about skilling, and Lata, this question is for you, is when we talk about empowerment through skilling, we're often talking about employability. How do we reframe this vision so that skilling can also make women creators of more jobs, women leaders in technology and future skills, not just women who are employable?
Absolutely. I think we have seen an increase in the number of women who are in the industry. I'm not saying we have reached a level where we can say we are equal, but the number is increasing. India's story is very interesting, actually. You can tell it the way you want. If you want to say great things about Indian women, we can start saying those things. I have hundreds of things that we have improved. If you talk about the issues, we continue to face 200-years-old issues. And very, very basic things. We are still have girls being burnt down for dowry. Every day now, in recent past, you must be reading, gender-based violence is rampant everywhere. So we are also dealing with very basic survival issues where we can't take anything for granted. The property rights. Even though the government has legislation, only 13% of the women in the world have property in their name. Only 13%. So when 87% of the land is in the name of men, how do you think this world is going to be equal? Mobility, transportation, child care work, the unpaid care work that women do, I mean, the issues are immense. But skilling and employment is absolutely critical, and I see many women employers now who are coming forward. But I don't want to burden only women to provide employment to women. If that is the case, it will take us under 33 years to reach that gender equality marker. No, men have to come forward. And not because we are a welfare segment, because it makes perfect business sense for them. Companies around the world have shown data that any company which has employed women has doubled the performance and the profits. So if there is a strong business case, and we have been listening about data, and if you don't measure it, you can't do anything about it. Now there's data to prove that the diverse workforce brings more profits. And so I'm not asking for any special measures for women. I'm saying give equal opportunities to women, because you are currently working with 50% of the talent pool. So it's a national wastage, it's a global wastage, it's also, it's a human rights issue, and you are denying opportunities to 50% women.
Thank you, Kanta. Lata, over to you.
Yeah, I would also extend my thoughts here. First of all, good evening. Very honored to be here and to share the stage with eminent panelists and speak on a topic which is quite close to our heart. Well, we are in an era where the world is literally going through or redrawing the skill shift. And it is like a historic shift where skills are being redefined. With the advent of AI, cybersecurity, automation, data, and the focus on sustainability goals. So when we look at the global workforce, what we're seeing is employers worldwide are seeing at least half of the workforce would focus on reskilling their core skills. And not just that, probably 89 million roles would get displaced and 69 million will get emerged and many millions will go through a transformation. What does it say? The message is very loud and unmistakable that resilience for future is continuous skilling, be it anybody, more so with women. And I would just like to go and set a little context before I can come and answer your question. Like going to the origin of computing, Charles Babbage is a name which all of us remember across the industry. But how many of us know a name called Ada Lovelace? She was part of Charles Babbage's team. I'm talking about the 1800s. When the analytical machine was being designed, there was somebody part of the team who really extraordinarily imagined that this machine can do much more than crunching numbers. It can actually solve a problem, compose a music, or even mirror a thought. And she converted that into an algorithm. Yes, Ada's genius got buried in the history of footnotes of history, but it got documented. Years later, this got formally acknowledged that she is the first programmer. Fast forward to today, what is happening? A 3.45 billion global workforce, of which STEM workforce, which I represent, or the technology workforce is about 9%, out of which 29% form women, out of which 12% come into the leadership. While the numbers through the years are encouraging, it's also disappointing when we look at the future because AI is in. You're in where the future is being coded with half of the talent not being included. The statistics say that 1 in 5 people who are focusing on, professionals who are focusing on AI are women. That means we are at a risk of future being coded with all the biases that exist even now. What is bringing this down to what does leadership need? Leadership needs logic with ethics. Leadership need experimentation with empathy. Leadership need lot of collaboration, not just being in control. Leadership need innovation. Where is gender featuring in it? Women are well positioned to take up leadership roles. So when we think about, so far, yes, motivating women to come to employment is very important. That is a journey. But more so now, to motivate them to come into leadership roles and also in entrepreneurship. I think what the ecosystem can do, what the women ourselves should do. I think the previous session talked a lot about mindset, as it's for us women to think that we don't have to shrink into a template to become leader. We can hold ourselves and then also become leader. Organizations, ecosystem, bringing policies, encouraging back to work, rolling out, not concessions, but enabling when they need a little bit more help. Then also bringing in a mindset change that in terms of being defining a career which not just grow vertically, what we traditionally call as career ladder, to career lattices which go horizontally also. You can have leadership growing horizontally and vertically and still come and hold the helm. So multiple things which can redefine the vision. What matters finally is it is no longer the scenario is about equality. Yes, equal opportunities definitely matter. It's about excellence and their inclusivity matters. It is not only about being employed, it's becoming unstoppable because the world is moving at a different pace altogether.
Thank you, Lata. So, Radhika, as we are on this quest for women to be more unstoppable or at least to move into this kind of mindset where they want more for themselves, From your HR and advocacy perspective, what are the real barriers that women face, especially those who return back to career after a break, above the years, let's say above 35 years of age? And what are tangible changes that can be brought about to alleviate these challenges?
Good evening, everyone. So when we were talking about Skill Up program, identifying the skill gap programs, I just want to take a different look at it, primarily because there is a very distinct difference for women to come back to career, primarily because of the societal induced or embossed gender roles. So primarily we all know why this career break. That is because of their gender-specific societal roles, the caregiver role as a mother, as a wife. This is one of the life events in their life, in their 20s, when they started the career, then suddenly they have to have a career drop. Rahul and the Pooja has come up equally well in education, in engineering graduation, and in the early days of their career. But then Pooja and Rahul gets married, but Pooja's career gets affected because she may have to relocate or she may go the family way. And so then she will drop the career ball because that is least on the priority for a woman because of the societal roles that are on them. So how do we address this? Because there are two cases here. One, we have to make sure that women below the age of 35 doesn't drop their career ball. And if they have dropped it for some reason, how do we address the barriers that they have in front of them and remove them so that they can come back to the career? So we had a very interesting roundtable discussion when one of the participant was saying, build more daycare centers, have elderly care facility in place, have community kitchens, outsource repetitive work, non-value adding work at home. And then you have the time, because everybody has only 24 hours. We cannot play the superwoman by doing the heavy lift of career and family. So one thing, have an ecosystem. The society has a major role, as Kanta was mentioning. So we have to pick it up and then create that ecosystem to free the woman to pursue their career. When we are building more of this caregiver facilities, what we are actually doing is we are looking at an unskilled or a semi-skilled workforce in the marginalized majority segment of women without a job but not highly educated. They can be retrained as caregivers and they would fill up and take this non-value adding repetitive work as a caretaker, as a nanny, as a nursing assistant at home. Their livelihood improves. And in turn, the professional women who has an aspiration to go up in their career, they will be able to continue their career without a career break, because after maternity leave, they don't have to drop the career ball. And their highly skilled resources who are STEM educated, the engineers and the scientists and the academician, the women professional can stay in career and stay ahead. We will not have that talent drain that we are worried about. So this is a two-pronged approach. Make sure that women don't drop their career. So the same barriers stop them from coming back. So remove the barriers. As a society, we can do that, and we will be able to achieve the numbers we are looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Radhika. So not just about removing the barriers, but also with this approach, you would be effectively supporting two strata of the society. You would be able to bring professional women back to career where they could, further grow on, and then also bring more of the semi-skilled or unskilled women into positions of care where they could contribute and they could earn for themselves as well. So, Dipanwita, this question is to you. When we talk about these women coming back to career after a break, there is inevitably skilling which is required. And there are many skilling programs out there. But this doesn't always translate into employability. So what are the gaps? What is it that the industry needs versus the training content available today? And how do we address this?
Sure. Namaskaram. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Tina, for the question. So yes, though there are a lot of training programs in the past wherein the state has invested heavily, but unfortunately, not that all got converted to employability. There has been some gaps. So to talk about the gaps, the training sometimes lags behind the industry needs. So what happens, it's like the speed and the context of the real world, real world problems does not get addressed by the trainings. So the training sometimes gets more focused on the academics or the theory part of it, and what gets missed out is the applied skills or the real, world problem-solving skills. So that happens. So, but there is a, there's a way to deal with that also. So, for example, if we try to mitigate the gap between the curriculum and try to align with the needs that is coming up in the emerging sectors, aligning with the corporates, NGOs, startups, global economy, global companies and all. So that is one way we can bring everybody closer. Second thing, many a times we see that lack of soft skill. So what is needed in terms of communication or the language skills or the global cultural awareness skills, collaboration, adaptability, that lacks. Third is the lack of focus on the, future, I would say, future tech skills. So that is, for example, focusing on green energy, focusing on AI, focusing on robotics, or healthcare tech. So that is what gets missed out.
Okay. Dipanwita, thank you for that. So I'd like to just connect that over to Sai in terms of, because I know that EY does its own training programs. You recruit large batches where you do your own training and then you offer them job opportunities as well. But even in organizations like yours where returnship and second career opportunities exist, we see that many women drop out after a re-entry. So what is the structural change that an organization might need, or what do we need to address to ensure that women not only re-enter, but once they're back in the system, they're able to thrive and grow?
Sure, thanks, Tina. Yeah, you're right. We've been working back with the government of Kerala over the last 5 years, trying to ensure that we are bringing back women from, who have had career breaks into, we are getting them re-skilled, and then we are putting them into opportunities that exist here. I've been pretty lucky. I think till date, we have hired at least about, we've trained over 500 women, and we have recruited over 300 women. And I'll tell you, over the last 5 years, we have had very less attrition from that team. And in fact, a vast majority of that team has been great rock stars in the team. They've been great performers. They've been performing extremely well, right? But to your question, I think, the starting line is just basically about, how you go out, recruit people, provide those opportunities, and upskill them, bring them in. That's one part of the story. But I think there's a huge distance to the finish line in terms of how do you actually retain professionals, provide them the right type of ecosystem, how do you ensure that they thrive in an organization? And to address that, I would categorize it as two parts. One is the structural part, the other is the cultural bit, right? Structurally, it's about how do you ensure that, women, they get that opportunity, they find that balance between work as well as in terms of what they were balancing in the past in terms of running their homes, right? That's one part of it. And in addition to it, the flexibility, right? The aspects around the transparency around career growth opportunities. What does that career path mean for them? That's all the structural element. But in addition to it, the cultural part of it in terms of providing them that, the home where they can actually thrive, right? In terms of mentorship, sponsorship. Mentorship is just not enough. It's about sponsorship where, the leader is also advocating that this is something that we are looking for doing, right? And we want to ensure that people are successful. And it's not something that we are doing just for the tick in the box, right? That provides the right sort of environment for women to be successful in returning back to work. So in my mind, I think these are the two bits that we should look at.
So when we talk about this, I think one of the things that we could also maybe recognize and acknowledge is that probably women who are returning back to career are looking for greater flexibility in their work. So Lata Nair, this question goes out to you, is while this gap exists, right, in terms of what women would expect when they return back to the workforce in terms of work flexibility, what corporates typically would expect or what corporates would offer as job opportunities could vary significantly. Particularly if you look at rural women, right? They have limited access to mainstream jobs since it might demand a relocation to the city. This automatically restricts their ability to even come back to career at all. What are some innovative approaches that would allow women, given all of these circumstances that surround this, to rejoin the workforce in spite of issues such as a gender commutation gap, or in spite of a need for increased flexibility, and while doing so, still earn fair income and eventually have career progression?
Yeah. I think employability for women generally has two aspects. It's more than the capability aspect. It's about access and it's about confidence. More so with women who are coming from rural areas, or because the job concentration is in the cities and their duty-bound operations happen in communities which are a little away from there. So when you look at why corporates are organized in a little rigid model, if I may say, it's because for India to emerge as strong corporate sector or particularly IT industry, we had to design follow the sun model. We had to be available every time so that in the global scenario, we were strongly positioned and it mattered. But now is the time when we are talking so much about inclusivity, which is realized as a need for a resilient future. What we should bring about is things which we most often talk about, being flexible. Can people work from remote? Yes, there are queries on are they as effective as compared to a person who is present in the office. So while there are merits and demerits, the earlier aspect which I mentioned about access and confidence. Access is the responsibility of the ecosystem. Confidence or mindset is the responsibility of the individual who is wanting to seek a role in the future. So what corporates can do is, yes, back to work, or those policies should be quite friendly and enabling in the beginning days, unless they are as much as people are as much contributing as one of their own employees who are coming to office. Second thing, accelerated leadership training, like what WIT do. Very focused leadership training compared to what men go through, because for women, even today it needs a lot of reiteration that yes, you can do it. That matters. Then I think having policies where you can define things like job sharing model, which is coming up actively. What is job sharing? Somebody sitting remote and somebody sitting very actively can be paired, like how we do buddy mentoring, can be paired so that the potential is unleashed from either side. I think you hit the ground running when you work with such a person. And then you can also have sessions, mentoring, in order to encourage women to become job creators. Because that seeks a very different kind of confidence and attitude. And when you become a job creator, that is to the women who become as entrepreneurs, encourage more women. Because you know the battle or you know the path you have walked to make yourself up there. So give it back to many women. So I think initially, active focus to bring women to the forefront, particularly women in the rural. I think we have to also depend on community organizations, including the initiatives like Kudumbashree. I think people can surprise you very, very much. I would like to talk about one example which IBS Software, my organization, is currently focused on. We started as a corporate social responsibility on capability building. This is called Future Point Drivers. This is about upskilling or skilling women to become professional drivers, an arena which is dominated by the men, you know. I got dropped today in this venue by one of our Future Point drivers. And when we started off, this was about capability building. But when we went through the program, what we realized that we were building a platform where what featured was confidence, independence, and leadership. Why leadership? Because for a woman who is not used to driving, and to think that she can become a professional driver and earn a living for her family, the hands, when you sit behind the wheels, it creates a natural leadership because you're breaking a barrier and coming out of it. So you are not essentially leading a team of 1,500 people or 100 people. You're just driving the car but earning, and that liberated feeling that I can earn, taking this skill. So we found that as quite revolutionary. So what matters? Flexibility. I think in the previous session we also talked about dignity and fair progression. If we combine skilling or we bring innovation in skilling with these aspects, not just women, every person who wants to come up can have a space. That's what I would say.
Yes, please.
So I go from state to state. Can you hear me clearly there? Because I'm not able to hear colleagues properly. Can you? Echo on the stage, I think. I go from one state to another to basically, because we are working in many states, I see three things clearly. The CEOs want women. They want more women to be in the workforce. And I will leave it to you to decide why he wants the women. He wants to look good, as my understanding, that my company has 45% women at the entry level. This is what, we are a diverse workforce. There's also a mandate from their multinational headquarters, whatever. Some men are extremely sensitive. They understand the value women bring. Once they have employed, everybody will understand. The first chance has to be taken. The resistance comes from middle management, because this will mean change of culture. How men behave on the shop floor, what they do, what they talk, how they dress up, everything has to change when women come on the shop floor. So I have seen this. Secondly, government is very keen, again, first to look good, also under pressure from a lot of women's organizations and everyone, equal opportunity. There are constitution saying equal opportunities to everyone. However, if you go to North India and go to any state, you'll find many men pushing for employment for their sons. So nobody is fighting for women's employment. And I'll tell you why. Because boys, when they don't get jobs, they become law and order problem. They become, many of them go in different directions. They become a problem for the state itself. Forget about families. So boys have to be employed. Girls, if they don't, they can study, they don't want to work, or they want to work, I'm sorry. If the families don't want them to work, they can get married, and they will not create any noise around there. So I see a great reluctance for women's employment to be pushed by anybody. It is nobody's issue, to be very honest. Only young women are pushing for themselves. And that's what gives me hope, that with educated women around and in such large numbers with skills like AI and Gen AI and whatnot, when it is not lifting weight, right? That you can say it is men's job. Nothing is men's job. I see more and opportunities for many, many women to do anything. As far as rural women are concerned, in next 5 years, the distinction between rural and urban women will cease to exist. Because the aspirations are same, the dreams are same, the exposure is going to be same, and I think we are going to face a talent glut, and then employers will find it difficult how to choose. Last thing, I think men are hired on the basis of their potential, and women are hired on the basis of their performance. So women have to prove themselves first to be given, equal money. Men have to, he studied this, he will deliver it. So I think we also have to change the tools of measurement for men and boys, also the performance management. Sorry for the straight talk.
No, appreciate that. Thank you, Kanta. So, Sai, I'd like to go over to you. Sai's listened to what Kanta is having to say and started to look a little uncomfortable. But my question to you is, what are sectors that offer the most potential for women's participation in the coming decade? Like, looking forward, what does that look like? And how do we enable women with the critical skills needed to excel in those spaces?
So if I kind of looked at, the emerging space, and this applies to everybody if I were to think of it, but more so from a women's standpoint, I would say anything on the digital space, technology and digital transformation, AI, cyber, these are areas which are significant, of course. Then you have ESG, right? ESG is another area where women can play they potentially have a larger role to play if they got into that space. And third is, of course, if I looked at life sciences and healthcare, that's an area which is significant again. Now, when I say, the technology or on the technology side is just not about coding, it's skills like, you have design thinking, right? You have, you need to look at, for example, in terms of how do you bring the human touch, right, in terms of human perception, in terms of any of the technology. So if I thought of all of these, those skills, these become, today, for example, I think there's a need to upgrade the skills, right, to say what skills are we exactly looking for. Like design thinking is an area, right, design thinking, do we have any courses on design thinking, right, is it being offered to people, or is there awareness of such courses being offered, right? That is the second part of it. So in my mind, some of these skills that I alluded to are things that, women are very adept in terms of, performing in terms of those skills, right? So in any of these three sectors, if I were to kind of look at it, right, technology, digital, ESG, or for that matter, these all are trillion dollar type of opportunities that exist, right? So in these sectors, if there's upskilling, there is significant opportunity for women to actually lead in these space, right? Now, in terms of the skilling platforms, like I said, there's a need to kind of identify what are those real skills, right, that matter in terms of that future. And also look at, when you look at those skills, how do you actually create that platform for availability in a broader way, right? There should be that awareness in, let's say, for somebody in rural to pick on those skills, right, in a very consistent fashion. So that need for investing in a platform, I think there's opportunities for public-private partnership to build out those platforms, to create that awareness, build out those right type of skills, to bring in, ensure that we are kind of going in the right direction in terms of bringing in women into the workforce.
That makes absolute sense. Thank you, Sai. So, Radhika, over to you with a question on some of the work that you have been doing with Women Inclusive in Technology. What are strategies that WIIT has adopted to prepare women for leadership within high growth sectors, within opportunities that exist today and into the future?
When we are talking about what we do at WIIT, Women Inclusive in Technology, we are an NGO focusing on capability building and capacity building programs for women using technology as a lever. So we all know this number that we, on every forum we discuss about it, the gender ratio in the workforce. If you look at the IT workforce, then, at the entry level, we have achieved 38-40% gender ratio. Women are there. The healthy gender ratio is there within grasp. But as we progress, at the supervisory level, it drops down to 18%, and at the CXO, at the board level, it tapers down to 2%, insignificant, 2% in decision-making and participatory governance level. And so the proverbial glass ceiling exists. And there are multiple reasons why we are unable to break this glass ceiling and get more women at the leadership role. More women will be able to lift other women. And so I know Kanta had said it is not just the responsibility of women, but it's a societal, inclusive responsibility. But then more women role models in the leadership position will inspire more women and the generations to come. So that is the story. And so for that, WIIT has a very inspiring accelerated leadership program for women in technology. And from various companies, the mid-level managers come together. They go through a 6 to 8 months experiential journey. And I just wanted to, touch upon the opening session that they have. It's an outbound training. They go to Tenmala ecotourism landscape and do rappelling, all sort of physical exercise, jumping on the trampoline and then do the trust fall. And this is NLP. This is pure science. I know that NLP is debated, but when I'm talking about this pushing the envelope activity that women does at the mid-manager level, and when they are saying, okay, this is something that I never thought I would be able to do, but I'm attempting it. And when they are pushing the physical boundaries that they have set, self-limiting factors in their mind, they are removing the mental barriers also. And that is a game changer for them. After the next 6 months, when they are going through the 360-degree training on financial management, project management, personal management, everything, and project management with real projects, with mentoring support from power mentors, having interaction with the CXOs, and then the coaching session, they emerge as confident young women ready to take up leadership roles in their organization and also outside. We have seen that transformation and life-changing experience. And in the last 6 editions of ALP, we have trained close to 200 young women. This is a leadership pipeline that we are talking about. So women, more women in leadership with focused approach, yes, we can reach there. We truly believe that it's a collective effort with the government, with the companies sponsoring, with trainers coming in, and then WIIT pitching in. Very many members, they have a day job, but then they are pitching in with pro bono support to this initiative. That is a game changer. And I just wanted to highlight this to all of you out here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Radhika. So Deepanvita, the next question goes out to you. As Kerala is continuing to focus on skilling, opportunity creation or the demand side always continues to remain an open question. So what role, in your opinion, should industry, government and academia play together in creating long-term career pathways for women rather than one-off interventions?
Thank you for the question. Well, Kerala has done commendable work in terms of building the skilling, I would say skilling programs, the entire ecosystem that has been done. So, however, there is a long way to go, and the various roles that these forces can bring in, the industry, the government, or the academia, is to all three of them can come together and come up with things which can convert women's life and Kerala's economy into real opportunities and change the, I would say, change the ecosystem. So in terms of the industry, or the corporates, what can be done is bringing in, collaborating with the academia, bringing in, in designing the content of the training programs or these, the skilling programs, that is one. Then corporates can bring in internship programs that can help the learners who are going through these skilling programs to get real life experience on the job training. The third thing could be building leadership pipelines, because what Kanta was saying that, hiring a lot of women to give a very good picture to the people rather than actually creating opportunities for women to have decision-making roles, that is important. In terms of the government can create infrastructure, government can create opportunities for women, having certain policies in place which encourages the corporate and the organizations to actually hire and retain women workforce, build infrastructure, build policies related to safety of women, build support system for, say, daycare, child care, elder care, so that women can actually focus on work. And in terms of the academia, I would say, of course, theory is important. In addition to theory, if they can also include applied skills, problem-solving projects as part of the learning interventions of the programs, that would be good. Secondly, academia can also partner or collaborate with the industries or corporate in terms of having labs, creating learning labs or the future labs for different, emerging techs. Then third thing would be, taking inputs from industries, from the startups or the global companies or the experts in, how to create career counseling, how to let the woman being aware of the opportunities that is available nowadays, not just, which is not limited to what it used to be 5 years back. So that, and then, creating, having guides and mentors to support the women population, I think this can come into play.
I apologize for interrupting. Last 5 minutes. Sorry.
So I think we'll just head into some of the very pointed questions now, and maybe just take 1 minute to answer these. So, Sai, I'd like to go with you first. If you had to pick one area where government, corporates, and NGOs could co-invest to create maximum impact, what would that be?
If I were to choose one, it would just be care infrastructure, right? Both elder care as well as child care. Today, women, the main reason women drop out of work is primarily because they do double duty, right? They have to take care of, they're the primary caregiver at home, plus they need to kind of come and work at offices. So if there is a if, let's say, government and the NGOs, right, and corporates got together to figure out, in terms of actually building out that infrastructure, support infrastructure, right, for women, in terms of both elder care as well as child care, it'll make the life easier for women to actually come to work. Now, that would be one. And secondly, I think if, once this care infrastructure is figured out, the other part is investing in, like I said earlier, a skilling platform, which provides the opportunity for people to upskill. I mean, the technologies which are relevant today are not going to be relevant tomorrow. Things are changing pretty fast, right? By the time we create those platforms, by the time we identify the courses, what's relevant today is not relevant tomorrow. So there's a need to kind of really keep upskilling, reskilling, and so having that platform which can provide that awareness or an opportunity for people to pick up something that they like and they're passionate about and learn is going to actually take it to a long, it's going to go a long way in terms of making this happen.
Thank you, Sai. And I've got just 2 more questions. Kanta, the next one goes out to you. Very quickly, if there was one actionable policy that the state government could adopt to empower the female workforce in Kerala, to integrate them both globally and locally, what could one actionable policy be?
I'm sitting in Kerala. Kerala has done many, many, many things, right? And an example from Kerala, what Vidya Balan says, what works in the film industry? Entertainment, entertainment, entertainment. In this area, I will say investment, investment, investment. Without investment, nothing else will happen. So, but because private sector remains one of the largest employers, they'll have to come first. Government is always doing the catching up game, right? Because by the time government decides and the policies are implemented, something has changed here. What we have been seeing this since morning. So I think private sector has to put in resources and real investment into their education, skilling, employment, but hiring and retaining the talent there. I think that requires patience, a lot of love, and the hunger for success. I think that is what it will drive, investment.
And the hunger for change. So last question, Radhika, out to you. If we were all to reconvene in 5 years' time, what would be measurable indices that would tell us that Skill Her and all of the ideas that were discussed here today have actually empowered women, have actually taken us forward and made Kerala a role model state?
On a lighter note, a Skill Her panel will not be skewed with more women on the panel. And the inaugural panel at the Skill Summit will not be men heavy, but will be gender balanced. So healthy gender ratio, 60-40 or 40-60 in every aspect of life, all across hierarchy. That in participatory governance, in politics, so that is what would tell us Kerala has moved from God's own country to a land for all of its people. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time.